Today we're continuing our series on Jesus' parables that we're calling As It Is in Heaven, Finding Eternity in the Here and Now. A couple weeks ago, Don shared a wonderful sermon that focused our attention on how the stories of Jesus in the Gospels convey the message that all are welcome. There is no we, there is no us, we all are one, something like that. And last week, Cullen talked to us about the parable of the kingdom of heaven as a mustard seed, the small seed that grows wild and fast. We also learned that kingdom can really be conceived as kingdom, so that we're not focused on an autocratic leader who controls their realm, but rather a community of kinship where all are invited to take part of the wildness of God's plan for us in the world. Don and Cullen are hard acts to follow, but I hope what I have to share this morning will find you where you are and be a help as you figure out what to do with all this kingdom talk. I've titled my message this morning, A Treasure Found, Meditations on Wealth and Sacrifice in the Kingdom of Heaven. And I'll be sharing a series of meditations on those subjects. Our scripture this morning tells the same parable two different ways. A person finds a treasure, then gives up everything to get it. Quite simple. Parables are like the best kind of inside joke. The kind that is crafted so perfectly that the outsider hears and finds themselves laughing, unaware of the real joke inside the joke that only is truly understood by the insiders. Jesus says that those who have ears to hear will hear, and those who have eyes to see will see. The simplicity of the parable hides the complexity of the message buried beneath it. What is simple about these parables is what makes them so subversive. How you define treasure makes all the difference. How you define treasure will reveal the lengths that you will go to get it and keep it. How you define treasure will determine whether you keep it for yourself, or give it away, or something in between. How you define treasure will also determine whether what you find is really valuable, really worth giving up everything else for, and that measure will determine what you are willing to do to get it. The kind of treasure matters. What kind of treasure is found in these parables? Prelude toward a meditative state. What is the kingdom of heaven like? What are its borders? Are they wide and open, or do they find their limit at a fortified wall? What of its topography? Is it flat yet marshy? Is it craggy and majestic like a mighty mountain? Are there miles and miles of trees? Is it landlocked, or can you reach the sea, salty and windswept? Is it acres of wildflowers or tended fields? Is its greatest feature its natural oasis, or its massive structures of steel and glass? Is it small and exclusive, or does it expand into infinity? And who lives there? What are the people like? Are they genuine and caring, or are they callous and arrogant? Would we want to be their neighbor? Meditation number 1. What are you looking for? The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all that he had and bought that field. I've been thinking about this man who comes across this treasure, hidden in a field. So odd that he would find it unless he was on the prowl. Yet he does find it. And how does he react? Not like a very rich person, not like one who already has everything they need. No, he acts like one who has hit the jackpot, like one who has finally found their comeuppance. It's too good to be true, he tells himself, and in his haste, thinking as irrationally as a person who finds a genie in a lamp, he reburies it. He hides it so that it cannot be taken away from him. He knows what he has found is so much more valuable than everything else that he owns combined. What joy he feels, what a treasure. And having bought the field, the treasure is his, the treasure he found. The man in the second parable is different from the first, but only in kind. He is on the search. He seems to know what he's looking for. He's a professional. He has been honing his trade, learning the ins and outs of pearls. One day he finally finds what he's looking for, a pearl of such value that he can sell everything he owns to buy it and come up aces. Unlike the first man, this guy knows what to look for, but like the first, he knows that the treasure found is worth more than everything else he has. So he gives it all up and goes for broke in order to gain the greater treasure. What are you looking for? What is the treasure that you seek to find that will cause you to sell everything you have in order to get it? The answer to that question is of eternal importance. Meditation number 2. Where your treasure is, there is your heart. 3 profiles of the potentiality of evil in the accumulation of wealth. In the mid-1400s, the King of Portugal commissioned Gomes de Zurara, a royal chronicler and commander in Prince Henry's Military Order of Christ, to compose the prince's biography. Until his death in 1460, Prince Henry sponsored voyages to West Africa by the Portuguese to circumvent Islamic slave traders. In doing so, he created a different kind of slavery, one that trafficked exclusively in black bodies. The biography was titled The Chronicle of the Discovery and Conquest of Guinea. It chronicled Prince Henry's slave auctions and is the first known work to group various dark-skinned peoples into one group worthy of enslavement. By grouping this black race of people into a single group, Zurara birthed race into the world. He used theology to separate the saved white rulers from the unsaved black beasts. This justification for slavery propelled Portugal economically, and the same racist ideas were used by other nations to build their empires. Zurara wouldn't be the last clergyman asked to give theological justification for slavery, for racist ideas and policies that would allow kings to maintain and increase their wealth. Fast forward a few hundred years and things pretty much feel the same. In the name of the United States' position of power in the world, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger forced the 1970s through an extruder of espionage and state-sponsored nation building in a rationally structured effort to maintain U.S. economic hegemony. The lives destroyed in the wake of policies that completely discarded the value of all human life as sacred number in unspeakable amounts. In order to keep the United States at the top economically, if not morally or ethically, in the eyes of Kissinger and associates, any amount of human suffering was justifiable. And again, fast forward to the era of Bezos and Musk, Gates and Zuckerberg, Trump and Bloomberg, vastly wealthy billionaires who have gained their fortunes through the legitimate veins of a deathly sick system. With so much accumulated wealth, how are so many living such miserable lives of suffering? How many have suffered for their gain? How many will continue to suffer? What kind of kingdoms are they building? What kind of heaven could they possibly offer? Interlude, the background reveal. I don't know if I can say that I really grew up poor. I haven't really done much to work through that. Not that it really matters, not in the grand scheme, because what I have experienced poverty-wise, because whatever I have experienced poverty-wise, I know that there are others who have experienced much worse. So it's strange to care about people who have suffered more than you despite your own suffering, when others who have basically never suffered have taken so little time to see how their lack of suffering relates to those who do, however minute their grievances. I remember having to take baths in the sink with cold tap water mixed with boiled water on the stove because we didn't have heat. I didn't know what that meant at the time. It was just the way that things were. I remember the time we were able to go on a paid-for school clothes shopping spree. How excited we were to be able to pick out clothes at a relatively expensive department store. Name brands? You got it. Cool clothes? It was the early 90s. Here you go. Never mind that it wasn't much. A pair of shoes, a couple of shirts, some better quality blue jeans that would last. It was a moment where we lived like the other side. It was glorious. I grew up in a strange land where I was pulled in multiple directions at the same time. On one hand, there was my family and my relatives, all trying to do the best with the hand they had been given. My grandmothers, one of whom was a nurse, the other a preacher. My grandfathers, one of whom was in construction, the other a sheriff's deputy. But on the other hand, I was failing to live up to the standard of my white privileged forebears. I looked down on my own family because they did not aspire to be white and wealthy, despite the fact that neither did I. If I'm honest, it colored the way that I looked at all the brown people around me, the brown people that were me. Shame is not placed on the poor, but by those who know how close they are to the same poverty. The wealthy can shame the poor when they so rarely think about them at all, but it is certainly done most by those who fight the hardest to keep themselves from drowning beneath the waters of poverty themselves. I fought shame in some very unhealthy ways. I let it seep in and take over. It was empowering in the worst kind of way. Meditation number 3. He sold all he had. In contrast to the profiles of Zurara, Kissinger, and today's billionaire elite, I present Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's Black History Month, so it's only fitting to think about one of the last great leaders of this country, a man who put his life on the line for his cause and ultimately paid the ultimate price of his life when he was assassinated in May of 1968. It's strange to me because growing up, the stories of Dr. King and the civil rights movement seem to have happened so far in the past. In truth, the time between his death and my birth in 1980 is younger than my teenage daughter. 12 years, that's all that separate his death and my life. Just 12 years. Of course, many of you were alive at the time of the civil rights movement. Dr. King is an interesting figure in the American consciousness because it seems that everyone thinks they can stake a claim on him, regardless whether his ideas are in line with their own or directly in contradiction. He has been made into the image of so many disparate political and ideological throughways. At least part of the reason for this is that his sacrifice was so great. We have a hard time comprehending what compels a person to give of themselves as he did. At the end of his life, Dr. King had begun to expand his protest against racial injustice to include protest against poverty and war. Dr. King was a living member of the kingdom of heaven, and he knew that that meant fighting for the poor, fighting for racial justice, selling everything to buy the field to get the treasure of the kingdom of heaven. The final meditation, in which the narrator finds a treasure. There are some who read these parables as a story of God paying the ultimate sacrifice, that is, Jesus on the cross, for the chosen elect that God has predestined for salvation. It's a very exclusive reading. I think it's dead wrong. I grew up being told that the kingdom of heaven was God's kingdom, but it's not. As Cullen shared with us last week, it's a kingdom, and that means it's both ours and God's. I grew up being told that the kingdom of heaven was something to be attained after death, and that we do what we do now while we're alive because it determines whether we ever get to enter that kingdom. But it's not. The kingdom of heaven is here. Here as in this room. Here as in right now. Today. I grew up being told that the kingdom of heaven was something to live towards, but it's not. The kingdom of heaven is something to live as it is in heaven, finding eternity in the here and now. At some point in my life, the script flipped. It was like one of those shirts where when you wear it the right way, the colors are muted, but when you turn it inside out, you reveal bright, vibrant colors. I had been told to wear the shirt one way, the right way, but now I wear it differently. You have to wear the shirt the wrong way to really get what it means to be part of the kingdom of heaven. It's uncomfortable most of the time, and people look at you funny, but it seems to fit, and it just makes sense. Some people went looking for the treasure and found it. Others are still searching, and they keep coming across treasure that doesn't satisfy. Or they find a treasure but don't recognize it for what it is. Myself, I stumbled across it. I can't even tell you exactly when it happened, and I don't know how to explain it, but I sold everything I had to get it. I bought into the kingdom of heaven and what it means for the world if we eschew worldly wealth for the treasure of community, for the treasure of belonging, for the treasure of being included, invited, and loved. It led me here with you. I'm sorry if everything is not clear. I'm sorry if I made things fuzzier. I didn't sit here and explain to you what the kingdom of heaven is exactly. I can't. But I can tell you this. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field.